Right, well it's going to be a little different today because we've got one of the oracles with us. Robin is down for a few days on the Isle of Wight, so we've taken the opportunity to meet together and talk to you and everybody else out there. So welcome to Robin.
Thank you, Carolyn.
My lovely nephew.
Well, there you are,
Bless
my
you.
lovely Auntie Carolyn too.
We've done such a lot of work together that it's lovely just to be together and spend a few moments together. Robin has got some information for us, which I'm going to read, which is, some of it came yesterday.
Actually, it was the day before yesterday. I think it was, yeah, anyway, sorry for confusing matters there.
Don't worry about confusing the matters, dear. We'll just carry on. He's had some... I want him to, first of all, I want him to tell us a little bit about the Underworld, because he speaks about the Underworld and the Overworld. So perhaps you could tell me something about the Underworld.
I can certainly give it a go, Carolyn. I live in West Cork in Ireland, a beautiful spot right by the sea, and it's a pure joy to live there. And my wife and I and our 2 children moved there in 2005. We recently moved to another house, and we live right by the sea now. My eldest daughter has left home, and she's doing very well for herself. And my youngest daughter is about 18. So I've always been in the building trade, and I was completely rebuilding this house we've built. And my wife was living in a caravan. It's all very organic, really, being blown by the gales we have coming up off the Atlantic onto the west coast of Ireland. And yeah, I wondered why we were actually doing this, certainly midwinter anyway. And it was getting a bit clogged in there with the girls watching Netflix at night and doing all normal human things. So I said, look, I'll bivouac in the house, and it was pretty much bivouacking, really. And I set up a bed and made this small little space look like home for a while. And I love my own company. You know, I love to sit and pontificate and think about all sorts of things, because that's where the imagination comes into play. And frankly, the imagination is the key to success as far as I'm concerned. So just one morning, you know, this isn't a regular occasion for me, but it happens. I woke up and these words were just going round and round like an elevator in my head. And they were laws of the underworld. So I wrote them down, and it was 5:30 in the morning, you know, I still wanted to be asleep. And they were just rolling, and the words were coming in, and I was being given another one, and another one, and another one. And eventually I said, oh, for goodness sake, let me get my pen and paper. And I did. And I generally have a pad close to bed, but I was fairly resistant to this because it was cold. I didn't want to get up. So I got the pad out, and I started writing them down. And I thought I'd mentioned them to Carolyn, but apparently not. So I've been in the dreadful Nephew book for the last couple of days, because she said, well, I've never heard those before. So I had them in the original book, and a lot of them were scribbled down, but I can read my writing, because when it's written quite fast, you kind of elaborate a bit on how you're spelling. And so I turned up on the Isle of Wight 3 days ago, and I thought what I'll do is I'll just write that a little bit more sensible and give them to Carolyn. I'd already read them to her over the phone, so I wrote them down. And bearing in mind it was 2 years earlier that you know, these things had happened, but it was as if it was yesterday. And as I finished the last one, I got about 5 or 6 more, just out they came. So I thought, okay, well, when in flow, you just go with the flow. And as a channeler, as an informant of information, you know, one of the things that I learnt to do is not interfere with the process. If you've got words coming through your mouth, or you're writing them down, don't rationalise it in your mental mind. Remove that completely and just let it go. So I did. The moment you interfere with this thing up here, the process stops, because you're using another modality and it doesn't work. So, that's as far as I can go with explaining how that process works. But, if you do anything repetitively over a number of years, it becomes second nature to you. So that's what happens. So anyway, I finished these rather grammatical pieces of information which Carolyn will read you, and some of the titles were astoundingly beautiful and clever. And I'm not that clever, so I couldn't have made them up. So I was delighted that these words were coming through. And after that, it didn't finish. The laws finished, and then it proceeded to give more information, which Carolyn will read. But before Karen delivers those words to you, I'd just like to explain to you what the underworld is. Because, if you read Tolkien, or if you read the various books, or, the Harry Potter things, you can imagine that they're spooky places. My belief is, and my perception, and that's all I can share with you, my perception, and if it sits well with you, then take it and use it as your own. But if it doesn't sit well, that's fine also. There's no imposition here. It's just about sharing something that comes to us and delivering it to other people that might like to see another side of the coin. And that's how I like to articulate information, because there is no proof systems. There is no maths and rationale to a lot of this, because it's outside of the realm of science. So, that is the key to letting the imagination flow, and that is where I work predominantly. And I know I'm pontificating on so many things, but it's important for me to be able to give you some basis of how this information comes forth, because it doesn't just happen at a whim. You do have to work reasonably hard to get to these places. So I'm just going to move us slightly away from the underworld, or that sort of thinking level, and just move us as if you're on a spacecraft heading towards planet Earth, and you're coming from another setup outside of the world. Now, if we are to consider that there are multi-layers of opportunity happening here in the now, many different planes and examples of life in motion, they're all happening in the now on this particular plane as I speak to you. As we sit here, on the ground here are other things going on. They're just in a different dimension of thinking. So, when and if you travel from out of space, from another scenario to here, how do you find and maintain the correct polarity for you? How do you get to April 22nd, 1922, or, how do you get to that? 2022. How do you get to that? Because from out there's everything happening at once. So, if you can look at it from that point of view, I'm going to try and explain it in layman's terms. As you're viewing it, if you could view everything that's going on, you're going to be seeing lots of different screens with all sorts of different scenarios acting out, with different sets of consciousness learning many different aspects of what they need to learn. One of which could well be me sitting here in front of this camera with these beautiful people around me. So all these polarities are happening simultaneously. So what I call the underworld and the overworld are the different aspects other than this one. So when I talk about talking to the fairies or the divas or different energy levels that are on the planet, what I'm talking about is they are simultaneously living their consciousness at the very same appropriation as us. No more and no less. So it isn't spooky stuff. What it is if you can just turn the dial very slightly and change the frequency, the building you're sitting in will just fragment and go. The world that is around you and the people around you will fragment and go, and a new one will appear, depending if you have moved to a frequency where there is reality. You might be in between those realities, and in between those realities there are also other aspects going on as well. Now, that's my perception of how it feels okay for me right now. Now, if I'd spoken about this 10 years ago, I certainly had the ability to think about it, but I didn't ever have the ability to articulate what it meant. Now, as you grow with heart and love and care and compassion, which frankly I've done since I was 50 and I'm only 57 now, you know, it's in the last 7 years there's been a huge awakening within me. Now, you know, one might maintain that 50 years was a waste getting to the 7 years. Oh no, it was what I call the apprenticeship. You know, the apprenticeship in itself is learning to become the individual and carry your soul in the way that needs to be carried. And, you know, I digress with so many different pieces of information, but it's very, very important to be able to bolt them together and look at all the different aspects, so you've got an ability to understand what it is that we're doing as human beings. Because from what I believe, and I can only say that using this device, this satellite device that I have here, doesn't just pump blood. This heart is your connection to your own universe. It is your satellite that beams back and forth out to the ether what it is you are, how you're carrying yourself, your articulation, the different aspects of you. That's what it does. Your DNA in itself is an eternal device that's so remarkable and unique. If we actually knew how unique it was and had the ability to understand, so many things would be considerably easier than they are. But nevertheless, if you could look at the aspect of how life is working in motion at this point in time, this is us. This is us, the three of us in this room at this point in time. Delightful Sam over there doing the wonderful recording, Carolyn sitting there listening to words and sharing things. That's the now and the moment. But there are so many other aspects going on simultaneously at this point in time. So to explain what the underworld is, or the overworld, it's just the other aspects happening simultaneously. Now, getting back to flying in and looking at planet Earth, what is it that you see if you don't have the correct coding? What is it you see? Is it a ball and dust? Is it like a space probe going to Mars? Is it what NASA sees when they film Mars and so on? From my understanding, I believe that's what it is. We live in what's known as, and this might be awkward for some people, we are living what is known as a facade. It's a reality maintained and created by consciousness, and that's purely it. And consciousness builds and creates. And within that building and creation, within all those aspects, are the furthest most extent of unpleasantness, and the furthest most extent of love and utility of life, consciousness in pure flow. Now, all those things united are called life. We can interfere with what we consider to be unjust goings on, which go on all the time, incidentally. I'm no fool, I realise that. But everything has a right to do what it does. You have to determine and discern whether you have a right to interfere with it. You know, wars, unjust goings on, is energy working out energy. I could go on in so many ways and try and discuss to you the ramifications of energy, but energy is like a boomerang. It always returns back to itself. Now, you know, you could get an aspect of somebody, how could God let my beautiful child die of this ghastly disease called cancer, or whatever it is that's happened? And I've heard people, and they're full of anger and anxiety, how could God let that happen? Now, I'm in no way talking with regards to God as if I am, because I'm certainly not. But if he was to answer that question, he would surmise probably, and do excuse me if this is offensive to anyone, but he would probably say, well, look, that is energy in motion. I only work with love. Now, energy, if you set a ball rolling down the hill, it has to roll and it has to come, work out as momentum and roll and come to a stop at the bottom. And if you want to pick it back up and take it back up the hill and roll it again and redecide another aspect of that ball's motion, then you can do so. That is energy in motion purely. And energy always works in like a clock face. It has a pie chart. If you set a conscious thought and a conscious pattern in play, and it becomes a realization, and it actually starts happening, just like the masters, people have come up with unique inventions. Another aspect of that in opposition will always come in play eventually when it's turned the full face. And I call that the pie chart. Energy has to start in one place and turn and utilize every aspect of what it means. The inverse of love might be called evil. Turn the word back to front is live. So what you're doing is you're just seeing the inverse of actually what's happening with it. So the way I see these things is, if we knew the characteristics of how this information works, how things really were, we would have an ability to see how the cosmos works, how the reality of us work, and how we are actually eternal human beings. Well, actually, eternal beings, we are known as soul carriers. Now, in the 1930s, if one could imagine, there was a huge telephone and a transmission was made out to the universe. Planet Earth is coming to the conclusion of a cycle. Now, one could call it the Mayan calendar, one could call it a 2,000-year cycle, one could call it consciousness working through and coming to a conclusion. So, if you were just about to move house, you don't just move out of the house and leave it all untidy and dust everywhere and rubbish in the corner for the next person to move in. What you do is, in the right mind, you make sure that you clean your act up, you make the house look nice and tidy, you leave some flowers out, and you leave it a spectacle for somebody else to enjoy. Now, really, energetically, I'm trying to make a story out of this so you can bolt something together and come to a conclusion as to what it means. We come into the end of a cycle. Help is needed to bring human consciousness back to a polarity that it's going to allow it to move on. Now, incidentally, from what I gather, we all have a choice. We have a choice with regards to, we can stay exactly as we are. Nobody, nothing is going to be judged. We all have a choice. You can stay exactly as you are. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But every single person in the world, including me, incidentally, because I've been feeling it immensely over the last 2 months, is going through a huge quantum change. It's almost as if time is coming to a conclusion. Relationships, friends, people, scenarios and situations, almost as if there's a neutral point. And all those things that seemed normal, correct, and part of human life don't feel that way anymore. Now, that's the way I feel, and when I discuss this with other people, and frankly that isn't very often, that is the answer I get. Nobody actually knows how to articulate what that means. The ticking clock in itself will come to a halt at midnight. Now, that isn't a sinister act. The skies are not going to go dark. The seas are not going to enclose around us, and we all come to an untimely demise in screaming in agony. None of those things are going to happen. But what will happen is, and what is certain to happen, is we need to observe that change, to understand that that observation in itself is giving you a conclusive comment stating, at this point, my children, my people, my person, you and your consciousness is going to be assessed. And assessed for what, one might ask? At that point, there's like a datum. Your consciousness will beam out its position and its knowledge level, its capacity, its integrity, its ability to love and understand. All those things will beam out to a central point. You could call that a God force. Now, energy moves towards energy. It's all it does. So what you could call it is energy coming to a conclusion, and it's trying to surmise which aspects of itself will grow and move into another aspect. And aspects that stay the same will stay exactly the same and will continue the utility of life as one is experiencing it right now. Now, when that information came to me, it seemed plausible. Now, you know, as an individual, you have to move these pieces of information down through your physical self, this bit that a lot of us have a difficulty maintaining. It is tough being a human being. Nobody said it was going to be easy, and it isn't. But there is another aspect of self that all those that work with spirit, care and compassion know. You know that you are an eternal being. And sometimes your mind won't allow you to move outside of that aspect because, you know, life and stresses and so on drag you back. But you must try and do that. You must try and grab hold of that conscious element of yourself that allows you to move out of the most important thing, fear. Now, let's just not look at a situation here called Big Brother, because I don't believe in Big Brother, frankly. What I believe in is energy. Energy only has motion given the process of belief. Okay? So let's just call it energy, all right, rather than Big Brother. Now, of course there's people, the other segment of the pie chart, the inverse of love, that are working through those scenarios. And as far as they're concerned, that's the right way to be. I don't challenge those things. I just understand that it's part of life. But you don't have to be part of that. You don't have to read it in the newspapers. You don't have to pick up magazines and strip yourself of well-being and fill yourself up with anxiety because of what's written within them. You don't have to, you know, listen to the news. And frankly, most of those things are disempowering aspects. Now, they're all a matter of choice. Human beings can either choose to believe what it is they're shown, or they can choose to accept. There's a big difference between accept and belief. So, moving on from that process, let's just look at it as energy in motion. It's life. It's what we must try and stand away from. Now, if energy wants to keep itself fired up and functioning as it is, what's it going to do? It's going to focus on trying to keep what keeps its momentum rolling in place. So if it's working on aspects of fear, then why not fill the world up with fear? Now, I don't know whether anyone's watched the news recently. I try not to, but you can't avoid what's gone on in the last 2 or 3 years, really. People that you thought would have stood up and held the light have faltered and fallen. People that you really considered would make sensible, wise decisions haven't necessarily been doing so because they've been forced into a corner, because they felt that it's absolutely imperative that, you know, that we maintain equilibrium. And if equilibrium is moving away from your moral standards, then as far as I'm concerned, that's not a good place to go. Moral standards come from here. You know, never ever drop your moral standards to somebody else's, ever. Always stand up for your own conviction and belief. And that is something it took me 50 years to cop that one on. In the last 7 I've been practicing it. But nevertheless, it's really, really important at this point in time to understand that what is truly happening isn't something that's going to keep us stuck. What's truly happening is energy has come a full 360 degrees and it's come back to itself. And what it's trying to do, it's doing what cells do. It's called mitosis. It splits. And the cell is splitting. The old cell in itself is trying desperately, to keep its equilibrium and motion. And by doing so, what it's doing is it's trying to keep everything that feeds it in place. So fear is a fantastic way of doing that. So look at it as energy rather than people acting in an untoward way towards you, your family, your friends, the world, the planet, the universe. Just look at it as energy. It's got nothing to do with God whatsoever. God is just privy to watching. Very, very difficult thing to understand. It doesn't interfere with energy. He's got his own body. He's got his own energy system working and playing, doing games. Because it's a chemical reaction. It's not an act of love. That's how energy works. So, if you stay within the original ball, the original cell, which is the one we're working within right now, that's fine. It could be another 2,000 years before you have an opportunity to regain the opportunity to move on to another cell. But the new cell that's creating through this mitotic process, called cell division of energy, incidentally, is going to give a new aspect of life. It's going to give new opportunity. Now, I can't tell you what that's going to be, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. But what I can say is, I don't know whether I personally want to be here for another 2,000 years.
I certainly don't.
And you know that's coming from the human aspect of ourselves. But in truth, this isn't about the human aspect. In truth, this is about your genetics. It's your genetics that carry energy. So it's the genetics that work within the combination of how all energy works. So it's your genetics. Attached to your genetics is your soul. That is the eternal source and connectivity to God and love. So it's really, really important at this point in time not to be confused and think that what's going to happen when all this change happens is the lights go out and the world is flooded and we've got to build a big ark on top of a hill somewhere. Because, that's an aspect of fear in motion. That's fear-based. It isn't about fear, because we need to move away from fear. Now, I know when I look around to so many people that I see, and this is including the people I love. Some people are desperately trying to hang on. Some people are desperately trying to recreate what it is they had in the life before COVID and the invasion of Ukraine and all the things that have been going on. They're desperately trying to get that back. And I just look and I go, well, look, and I don't intervene because it's not my right. If they come up and ask me my opinion, I will share it and I'll be delighted to do so, but I don't force it upon anyone. The only opportunity I have to share the feelings that I have inside here is when I'm talking to Sam or Carolyn or you through the camera. And you must discern whether that feels okay for you, because if it doesn't, that's fine too. Work in your own divine wisdom. Somebody said to me yesterday, I was chatting away to him, I said, you haven't asked me for my advice, so therefore I can't give it to you. But if you do, I'd be happy to share it with you. And this beautiful lady called Yvonne said to me, Robin, I never ask human beings for their advice. I always use divine consciousness, and that's where I get my answers. And I thought, what a beautiful answer. That's how I feel. But she's just epitomised it. And I was so respectful of that. The only reticence I have with that, and this is something that I have learnt, is we have the fragility of human framework, which is a pretty old design, really. Do you remember when we all got our first computers? And you know, in the old days it was working with something called DOS, and then we moved from analog up to digital, and all sorts of things changed. And you know, once upon a time there would be a huge computer room full of magnetic discs and things reeling round, and you could get all that in this microchip these days. You know, look at a human being as a relatively old design. We weren't designed for huge levels of stress. We weren't designed to be put into war zones and be traumatised beyond belief. And incidentally, that trauma gets lodged in the DNA. It gets lodged in the planet. It gets lodged in the earth. So energy has to work around that and go around and rebuild itself. And it takes generations upon generations to rebuild that. What's happening right now, as we come into the end of the cycle, is there are tens of thousands of millions of souls going through the process of letting go 2,000 years of incarnate programming. And it even goes beyond that. There's a huge story to all this thing, and we don't have time today to talk about it. But we do have time today to talk about is what's happening now. Because that's what people need answers for. It's all very nice reading a story of 2,000 years ago and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and all these things. But that was back then. That was in the 1300s, you know. We need to know about now. We need to know why we're feeling like we do. Why I feel like I do, incidentally, you know. I feel the same way you do because I'm a human being. But you see, I'm a human being that is also connected to a source of knowledge. And I'm sure there might be a few people going, well, where's that source of knowledge coming from? I want to know. I'll do my best to answer that. When somebody, for instance, through a blog or through Carolyn or somebody that knows me, that knows that I do this sort of work, asks me a question, generally what happens is I know that if I look and read that question straight away, I start getting downloads. You know, and if I'm hanging a door or putting a roof on, I can't be doing that because I haven't got a pen to hand, or I haven't, you know, I'm not in that framework of thinking. So I don't look at the question till I'm in the right space to be able to come up with some conclusive answer to that. And that's why sometimes it takes a week or two for the answers to come back, simply because I'm not in the right mindset to answer them, because I'm doing human being things, and I'm being a dad and a husband. But the answer to this is I get a question, and then when I have time to look at it, information starts coming. Now, it's not as if I'm talking directly to somebody, because that's never the case. It's like there's a library up there, and it's not the Akashic Records, incidentally. It's a library up there of consciousness. Bearing in mind everything's happening simultaneously, the question that you are asking has already been answered because it's already happened. So all the information is up there. Okay? And every question you're going to ask has already been said or asked or answered or whatever at some point. So there's a record up there of eternal information. That's the way I see it. In layman's terms, that's how I can answer it. So I'm not listening to Uncle Bob or Billy living on the Pleiades or any of these things. It's just a conglomerate of information and wisdom. Now, I will only ever look at things that are loving, caring. I will only ever work in those aspects. There are other aspects there to be found if you want to look at them, and they're there and you can see them. But you see, if you don't put your head, your mind, your body in those fields, they don't come and interfere with you, and you don't come and interfere with them. 9 times out of 10, that's how it works. So that's how those questions are answered, and invariably enough, I've got this methodology now where I just use my mobile phone and I go to recording and I record it. And then I can just send it through to Carolyn, and she delightfully writes it out and then reads it to me 3 or 4 years later, and I go, oh, I don't remember saying that. So I'm really delighted that Carolyn has been the transcriber of this information. Not only my information, but anyone that's providing information that is full of heart and love. Because, you know, I've sit and watched these videos and that Sam and Carolyn have done, and I look in awe. And when I was a young child, I used to come to Carolyn, you know, at 8 or 9 years of age. I would sit and ask her, and I'd say, who's God? Who's Jesus? What were the disciples? You know, I was absorbing information like a piece of blotting paper. And Carolyn, in her very, very busy life, and she did, you know, she was serving humanity in a beautiful way. And she said, look, Robin, after lunch on Wednesday afternoon, I've got 2 hours, you know, why don't we sit and talk? And I'd be so excited because I could go into a library and there was all these bits of paper and crystals and things like that. And in I went, and, you know, with my eyes beaming, and she'd open the book up, and the voice that you hear through those videos is the voice I heard. And I don't know whether you find it, but I still find it soothing and beautiful. And, you know, if there was a soul that delivers a beautiful message, we have one here. And I am eternally grateful that I'm being able to, later in my life, have the ability to share words that Carolyn can deliver in such a beautiful way, way better than I can do. Because she has the power and ability to deliver that information right from here, right from your heart. And secondly, we have this beautiful man that nobody's seen over there called Sam. And he's much happier behind the camera than in front of it. But if I could tell you what a generous young soul he is, and a beautiful man, I would do that too. So bless you, Sam. I've done a bit of chatting. I probably hasn't filled in all the words. There'll probably be a bit more of it, but I'd like to pass you over to Carolyn. Do excuse me if I haven't. I think I probably did most of it, but there'll be a bit more to come anyway. God bless you. Thank you.
Righty-ho. Well, I'm going to speak about the laws. I might tell you that last evening I went down to see my sister and Robin, and he told me these laws. And I said, well, I remember you telling me about them, but I've never written them down. So he said, well, if you like, I'll let you have my book and you can take it home and you can write it down. So I sat there after 10 o'clock till about midnight, writing these laws down. And I thought, I'm never going to be in a fit state to talk tomorrow. So, however, I did manage to write them all down. And they're very strange, very beautiful. But if anybody wants to ask any questions about the laws, please feel free to do so. So here we go. The first law, oh, by the way, these laws are confined to the underworld, not the overworld. And that's why I asked the question about the underworld to begin with. The first law is the law of appointment. Things are only there if you see them. Law of heritage. We become who we are because of who we have been. All very interesting. The law of consolidation. We develop matter only when we move outside of the laws of the unseen world. The law of unsettling hardiness. Retribution only stays neutral all the time you are unaware of its, I think the word is curse. It is, Robin says. I couldn't make out whether it was cause or curse. So retribution only stays neutral all the time you are unaware of its curse. The law of minimalisation. 1. Stay small and think small to be small. This can work any way you wish, both positive and negative. The law of minimalisation 2. We stay small all the time we are not thinking big. That's interesting. Law of anxiety and transparency. Never give away who you are unless you see yourself in a mirror. I was considering that, and I thought, everyone else is a mirror to ourselves. So never give away who you are unless you see yourself in a mirror. Law of consistency and willingness. Whilst we stay who we are, we must become all that we can be. The law of untruth and truth. A lie is not a lie all the time it is unseen. The law of consistency and maintenance. Let go when we finally manage to hang on. Let go when we finally managed to hang on. The law of tolerance. We are what we are because what we see makes us what we are. The law of untold truth. Exchange all thought with yourself, and nothing is left behind. The law of oneness at time. The ticking clock merits much change, but in truth, it happens all at once. The law of articulate management. We are made up of many conversations and discussions, all of which we must come to terms with. The law of untold momentum. Push the boundaries and you will move, but stay within and you will shrink to nothingness and insignificance. I found that very interesting too, because you can watch people sink into nothingness and insignificance if they're not prepared to push boundaries all the time, not prepared to be brave enough to go out there and do their thing and talk their talk. This is what's happening in the world too. A lot of people are afraid and they don't push their boundaries. They like to stay in their comfort zone. And the comfort zone can become uncomfortable these days. Then there was a little bit more which said, that was the end of the laws, by the way. And I shall think about them because I've only heard them yesterday, really, for the first time. And as I was writing them, I was thinking these are so important and very simple and yet very succinctly put. We are people, yet we are so much more. But we must go in search for the key to the significant doorway of eternal knowledge. This entrance is concealed to all those that see with their eyes open. The heart is indeed a key, but in truth it is one of many available to those that do not falter or sit on idle hands. The merit to knowledge gives access to all worlds, but these worlds differ in shape and tangential purpose. Robin had difficulty reading that word, and I've just had difficulty reading that word. So he looked it up in the dictionary. So it says, but these worlds differ in shape and tangential purpose, or tangential purpose. And the dictionary meaning says, diverging from a previous course of line, erratic but in control per se. So it's going off at a tangent. We all stick to a tangent because we are taught to be so. The adjustment to human profile must always come from a movement in profile from the mind first, and secondly, from the shapening form. We are truth in material form at this moment, but then can change along with your mind and its trajectory of thought in the universe that you create for yourself. The stars at night are migrating thought forms for all to see, yet each diverse spectrum of light holds minimalized aspects of consciousness in motion. Mobilizing your own consciousness inspires and changes light trajectory, both within and without. The time is right for us all to open our eyes and learn the laws of the unseen world. Nothing will come to harm all the time you have your hand on your heart. The door is open, so just walk through, my dear children. You are your own God and Master, just as it should be. The excess in human mind management is keeping the soul from moving in a conducive direction whilst observing life's true purpose. I'm going to read that again. The excess in human mind management is keeping the soul moving in a conducive direction whilst observing life's true purpose. Give up on faltering monarchs and live your truth through your heart. Ignore baloney fed through the media to your already toxic mindsets. The stepping stones are gradually turning, so be prepared to get your feet wet as you move to the other side of the river of consciousness. So much love, so much hope. Be willing. So that's what I wrote last night. But there was also a little bit about, this came on the 20th of the 4th, 22. So that's a couple of days ago, was it, or yesterday?
2 days.
2 days ago. In between lives, we become a spectrum of all our former selves. Yes, indeed, we are trapped in a single episode called life. But that is not all the story. When we gain perspective, once again, a further picture will appear and our mastery will come to the fore. You, we, us are all one, and nobody or nothing has the right to remove that perspective and rite of passage. Untold Episodes concludes as the clock strikes midnight. But this time, the hands stay still, and the conclusion to your journey is assessed at this point. The clock stops at midnight. You are not examined, prodded, or poked, but your consciousness will beam out your exact location in linear time and your state of conscious awareness at that point. Nothing will be removed, taken away, or added. You will be yourself, and your starlight will reflect this fact. Note that physical time has adjusted and will falter shortly, so this transition will be available for all to see and experience, even those who have eyes firmly closed to the facet of spirit and eternal life. Rejoice in your knowing, sing out in your knowledge, and love the you that you will become. That is my final word about those things today. And isn't it exciting that the clock stops at midnight? It's a bit Cinderella-ish. I'm going to look for the glass slipper. What have you got to say about that, Robin?
Well, bearing in mind, Carolyn, that situation visited me 2 days ago when I was sitting at Mum's dinner table writing out the laws, and then this information came through. When you're working in these fields, you have to feel embraced and in the right moment to be able to receive these sorts of things, because if you're up on the roof or you're driving your van to work or whatever it is that a builder like myself does when I'm in Ireland, you're thinking about normal human being stuff, and I have to try and do that to keep myself grounded and so on. But so your life isn't totally contained within this world, but it's a really important part. And the unique thing about information is it can be a fable, it can be a story, it can be anything you like it to be. So that's what I say to you guys when you hear these stories. You could be watching this 20 years on and you go, well, why didn't that happen? Well, maybe it did. Maybe you just missed it because you were playing football outside and something changed, Now, I in no way are stating, well, this is how things are, but what I'm stating is this is how things are for me. I've been a channeler since I was 30 years of age. I've experienced out of this world experiences that, sometimes when I look back and look at these things, you go, they're remarkable, but to me, they're unremarkable because they've happened and you've moved on from them. And when you learn as a human being to become the way shower that you are. Now, I started this story and I didn't finish it earlier, and I need to complete it because it's so conclusive, really. In the 1930s, the big phone was picked up and a call was sent out to the universe, and that call was going, planet Earth is coming to the end of its cycle. Will all those that have been involved in the positives and negatives and neutrals within that cycle return home, please? You're out there in the universe, you need to come back, because you need to be part of this activity where it changes and shifts. So all those that know that they come from somewhere else, and they're either the newbies, the indigo children, the special children that were born anything from 1940s right up until this moment in time, they're all returning home. You're returning back to a planet you no longer recognise. This might be totally unusual for all of you to hear this, but that call is bringing you all back. And that's what the way showers are. The issue is, once upon a time, planet Earth used to be pure utopia. It used to be without discernment, without lies, without deceit, without war. But of course, you see, nothing stays the same. Energy has to move around a trajectory, and that's what it's doing. So yes, utopia, dystopia, back to utopia again. It does the full gamut. But you're all coming home. I'm one of them. Carolyn's one of them. Sam's one of them. You guys who are watching this have to be, because you wouldn't be watching it otherwise. You know? So you've come home. Now the big issue is this, is you come home with something called an open heart. This thing in here is just expecting to be nourished and loved. And secondly, the moment you incarnate upon planet Earth, you have amnesia of everything and every reason why you came here for. So it's very difficult. You turn up and often you incarnate into families that don't have any idea of what your journey will be or whatever, and you're told to go to school and go and learn stuff and get a job and get a mortgage and get yourself in debt and all these things, and you get yourself so stressed up. And this open heart that you have to close it down and shut it down because it's just getting trodden on. Now tell me, anyone that's gone through the spiritual apprenticeship, which I have, knows exactly what that means. You know, you expect from a very early age to be loved by your mum and dad, by your brother and sister. Often that doesn't happen. Often you get in environments that are really non-conducive to care and compassion. So what do? What have so many of the children of today done? Got involved in drugs and drink. They just can't control this heart that is absolutely broken in two. So they go into all these places, they get into sex and prostitution and all sorts of things because they're just broken as individuals, and many of them sadly lose sight and take their own lives. Now this is a sad fact, but those that survive, and there are many of us that have survived that journey, are here today to carry that energy. And incidentally, all those that didn't manage to carry that energy are not chastised. They're loved just like you are. They just didn't manage to maintain that equilibrium whilst trying to live in an open war zone. And it is an open war zone. This planet is the most beautiful planet in the universe. Yet it is so difficult to live here. So any of you that are living here and managing to maintain equilibrium and love, congratulations. You've got to this point in universal time and you've earned the right to be here. So I commend you, because it's not been easy for me, and it's not been easy for the other two people in this room either, and it continues to be so. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Sounds like a song, doesn't it? But you know, what I'm trying to say in an encapsulation within the hour and a half we have here today is, listen guys, it's all coming to a conclusion, and all that love and all that care that you have inside you, hold on to it. You know, the practice run was yesterday and the day before, but today is real time. Be who you are, stand in your own light, hold your heart and be proud of who you are. You don't have to accept and follow the routes that other people will follow. It's so difficult because you will see mothers and fathers, sisters, brothers, partners, all going off in a different directive, and you feel lost and you feel as if, you know, you've let them down because you're not following that same route. But you know, if you look at the word in divide you all, it's a word, in divide you all. Now, one of the things that I look at occasionally, and believe it or not, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Bible basher, I'm not any of those things, but I believe that some of the words in the Bible are words that are original. You know, it's been changed and reformatted so many times, and religion is another story for me, and we don't have time to talk about that today, thankfully. But within these things, I look at things, and I constantly recruit as an individual the light of Christ. Because Christ in himself, as far as I can see, came to planet Earth, and he worked through the process of being a human being, and it wasn't easy for him. He made mistakes just like you and I do. But he also carried the Christing, the connectivity to God that we all have incidentally, but he had so much more. He was coming here as a disciple to try and deliver to planet Earth 2,000 years ago, incidentally, at that previous 2,000 year cycle of change, to try and bring and act as an ambassador of knowledge. And of course, you see, the knowledge he was delivering back then was for the changes happening back then, not now. He comes back in every word spoken in love. From you, from me, from Carolyn, from Sam. That's where he is. Speaking from love. Because the moment you speak from love, you speak from this satellite that you have here. And that doesn't let lies and deceit enter it. It just wraps them around it. It won't let them near it. That's why people have heart attacks. Because their heart isn't functioning in the way it is. So if you know anyone with heart issues, know that they are not living their truth. It's very, very difficult if you're suffering from that right now. But, you know, heart issues in themselves is your heart palpating out of rhythm with the unique connectivity with the universe. Because that's what it does. There is a rhythmic pattern of life. There is a rhythmic pattern of movement of energy. There's a rhythmic pattern of connectivity with the God source. They all ripple out into the universe and create like a binary aspect, a little bit like a drum beat out there. And that's what we hear, a humming. So don't be frightened right now. Be loving. Try and understand people. Try not to get upset with what it is you see. The best thing is try and see very little. Feel it in here. Try and turn off the televisions. If you're going to read the newspaper, read the sport at the back. That's reasonably humoristic. Maybe the jokes in the middle. The front 4 or 5 pages are absolutely and irrevocably designed to disempower you, as is the news. There's as much good news on this planet as there is bad. Believe you me. Mrs. Bloggs down the road has just planted 25 daffodils in her garden. How wonderful is that? That doesn't get on the news. We have to hear about death, rape, pillage. None of those things are important. Of course they are if they're happening to you. But you don't have to be part of them. Step back and be love. God bless you all. Thank you.